So I got a great question, and I can't find that question, so sorry if I didn't post it, but it's asking about India and what India's future looks like and what the position they will take going forward. And I personally am very positive on India. I think India has a great trajectory going forward. As long as Modi and his party kind of gets out of the way a little bit and can open up a little more, democratize, and position themselves as the true neutral but also influential power that they could become, especially in the region. Now, India has been an independent for about 76 years, but now more than ever, the nation faces a complex and volatile international landscape with opportunities to emerge as a global player and fulfill its strategic commitments. The geopolitical environment is influenced by the Russian-Ukraine War, the takeover of the Taliban in Afghanistan, which actually directly affects them, and impoverishment in Sri Lanka and Pakistan. They have other strained international relations also, such as those with China and recently with Russia somewhat, but not to an extent that is one where the relationship would likely break down. India's foreign policy objectives over the next 25 years will involve navigating a complex mosaic of geopolitical interests from major powers, as well as dealing with minor power issues. They'll focus on trade, technology, energy, and environmental concerns like many major powers are right now. They'll continue to engage in the Indo-Pacific and be a big part of multilateral institutions such as the Quad, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, as well as BRICS and the G20. But before they can really dive heavily into major foreign policy efforts, India must focus on addressing some internal issues. There's a lot of impoverishment in India, although their poverty rate is getting better and people are gaining more wealth in that country. It's still not to the level that it should be for them to be completely pivoting away from what domestic issues into foreign policy that benefits the country. They need to develop their infrastructure and they need to work on some of their social inclusiveness. They're still a bit backwards with regard to some of the social awareness that they have. But if they can fix these, it creates a strong and prosperous India, which positions them much better in the foreign policy world. And they can contribute positively in an international community. Now, India's foreign policy is based on the ancient Sanskrit concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, and I probably blew that, and it means the world as a family. Now, the country's transformation of look east policy and is transforming into what's called the Act East policy, has strengthened its balance to look more into the organizations like the ASEAN nations, which include places like the Philippines. They also proposed a recent plan of action policy declaring that the ASEAN-India Friendship Year was 2022. The Asian nations actually are designed generally to counter China's influence in the region. India has also assumed the rotating presidency of both the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is obviously Chinese-based, and the G20. Thus, India aims to showcase global leadership by focusing on developmental and economic issues and cooperation in startups, science, technology, and medicine, as well as just being a global player on the global stage. Now, you can see their alliances that they work with all cover a gamut. They work with China, Europe, the United States, and even Russia. And this is because India aspires to become a $3 trillion economy in the next few years and is focusing more on self-reliance by using technology through projects like the Made in India project and the Digital India project. They also aim to achieve a carbon neutral status by 2070 and promote the International Solar Alliance, which I'm kind of skeptical of with regard to getting to carbon neutral by 2070. They're still a developing nation, so that would be a pretty tall order, but it's an ambitious goal for them. They want to be strategically autonomous, both internationally and within their own alliances. So they fall well within the rules-based order, and they don't necessarily have a beef with the United States as a global hegemon. In fact, they nest very well in that, but they see opportunities in places like BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They're not trying to play favorites here. Whatever benefits India is whatever benefits India. Now, India does face challenges and opportunities in foreign policy when it comes to Pakistan and China, because both of those possess they pose a significant threat, requiring India to balance China's influence, both militarily and economically, as well as the rough relations they've had with Pakistan. Now, India has a lack of connectivity with places that Pakistan and China have influence, specifically in Central Asia, pertaining to places like Afghanistan, where we've seen a re-Talibanization of that country. They also have less influence in places like Iran than China and Pakistan. And the risk of Afghanistan becoming the terrorism epicenter will fuel cross-border tensions as terrorism via Pakistan into India could continue. And it has happened before, in fact, in 2008. However, India has seen some improvement in the relationship with Afghanistan, allowing for humanitarian assistance and peace-building efforts. Now, India's interests in the Middle East revolve around energy security, specifically in balancing the relations between Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Iran, while also countering Pakistan's agenda to somewhat undermine efforts of India's through the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which Pakistan has joined up with Turkey, Malaysia, and other countries to try to counter them. Now, interestingly, India has joined a new what is called the West Asian Quad, which involves the U.S., the United Arab Emirates, and Israel, aimed at economic cooperation to counter this Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Balancing the antagonistic big power relations is another challenge. They often fall between countries like Russia and the United States, China and the United States, Europe and China, etc. The one exception to what is generally considered India's strategic autonomy and not joining military alliances is their joining of the Quad. Now, it's not necessarily a military alliance, but it is a kind of a foundational agreement that they have with the U.S., Japan, France, the U.K., and Indonesia, and it's aimed at balancing against what is considered a pretty assertive China. Ukraine also plays a part in that because the Ukraine war has implications for the India-Russia relations. Over 60% of India's military inventory is of Russian origin, and several major deals in the pipeline are currently at risk or have flat out been canceled by Russia because of delays in production due to what is going on in Ukraine. Russia's involvement in Ukraine and the economic sanctions imposed on Moscow will have repercussions for India-Russia trade and defense cooperation going forward as well, something they'll have to navigate. They've actually pivoted away a bit from Russia militarily and more towards the United States and Europe when it comes to aircraft specifically and more advanced weaponry, and that might be something they will be going forward as well. India recently announced, though, they do have ties to Russia, the Act Far East policy and the Arctic strategy, which align with Russia's development plans for the Far East. India has pledged $1 billion for the development of the Far East in Russia and identified collaboration areas, as well as double down on bilateral trade, energy imports, infrastructure development, military cooperation, and Arctic research in that region. Now, both countries have a strong history of alignment, and they have come to agreement in a lot of areas where other countries have disagreed, specifically in things like the G20, BRICS, and even against Chinese interests in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, in the UNGC. Recent divergences have emerged with Russia, though, but the reason for that is because Russia is becoming a riskier and riskier position to align with. And so organizations like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization act as a ballast to what used to be Russia's major connection to India through BRICS. But India should continue to invest in its soft power, which includes cultural, educational, and technological outreach. It's doing things like the Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation, which is providing technical assistance to developing countries. So their influence is there. They are evolving into a pretty strong national power, and with a balanced and proactive approach to foreign policy, India is really well positioned to become a leading global power in the years to come, likely overtaking definitely Russia, and potentially even China with regard to global influence, mainly because of population alone, but also because their policies tend to align with a broader set of other nations, including the United States and Europe. They just kind of have to stay out of their own way. And I think the future of India is bright, and they can be a great help to the rest of the global community.